imagine you go back to 1880, and the elevator industry is starting to get some traction. And someone comes along and says, electricity is the proper way to power elevators, you'll see. And imagine thinking that might not be true. Incredibly, the Otis brothers, the American entrepreneurs who started Otis Elevator, actually their father started it, he went bankrupt. They were not convinced that electricity was the correct way to power the future of vertical mobility. They did invest with Thomas Edison in an obscure German electric motor company building motors just for elevators as a hedge. They still believed hydraulic power, or maybe something else, might come along. So let's go to about 7 years ago. I'm a driving enthusiast. I race cars. I'm reading about Tesla. And I'm thinking to myself, autonomous vehicles, is this the end of what I love to do? So I started a podcast. I started sniffing around. And it became very clear to me that autonomous vehicles were absolutely inevitable. But what was not inevitable was the certainty at the time of what business model would support their development and eventual deployment. So I joined Argo AI. It seemed to me there were maybe three approaches from a business model standpoint. There's the expensive, big stack way to do it, raise a lot of money and hope you can deploy before you run out. You can finance it through the sale of cars, the way Tesla was doing it. And then there's the third way, which is what one of our guests is going to talk about. Can you finance it while running a business in sector that pays for it and wait for everyone else to maybe survive or not? So today I'm thrilled to be joined by two of the most interesting people in this sector to talk about whether AVs are dead or inevitable and what role they play and have played in the past and the future in the deployment of autonomous vehicles. We have Shai Shalev-Schwartz, this Chief Technology Officer of Mobileye. We're going to talk about you. And former State Senator Jeff Brandes, who is one of the most important characters in American politics, because he wrote the first bill which made it possible to test and deploy autonomous vehicles on public roads. Welcome, Jeff and Shai. Shai, I'm going to let you go first. Tell us, as if anyone in the audience doesn't know, a little bit about Mobileye, a little bit about what's going on with you right now.
Thank you, Alex. So my name is Shai Shalev-Schwartz. I'm a professor at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem working on machine learning and also the Chief Technological Officer of Mobileye. It means that I'm teaching students and also teaching machines how to drive. This is what I'm doing. So I guess that most of Israelis know what Mobileye is, but to those of you who doesn't, Mobileye is a leader in driver assist systems. Basically, most car companies are using our systems. And we have leveraged our ADAS systems in order to make the next steps into a system we call supervision. Basically, it's eyes-on, hands-off system that can drive itself. And by the way, I arrived from Jerusalem, my home, this morning to here using this system on a Zeekr car. It drives by itself from my home here to Tel Aviv EXPO. So this system is already in production on Zeekr. It's a Chinese OEM, and soon will be on Porsche car. So the next levels of autonomy will stem out of such a system, but the idea is that starting from legacy features like autonomous emergency braking and lane keeping assist, going to eyes on, hands off, to eyes off, to full autonomy. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation and looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Shai. Senator Brandes, will you tell us a little bit about the bill that you wrote back in the day and why it was so significant in the deployment of autonomous vehicles in the United States?
Absolutely. So when I was first elected to the legislature, I had this concept that there's one big idea in every area of public policy, and I wanted to find that big idea, and I had to do it quickly. So I started watching TED Talks, and I watched hundreds and hundreds of TED Talks until I came across Sebastian Thrun's discussion on self-driving cars. And having been an Army officer and been a transportation officer who lived in Iraq for a year and run convoys throughout the country, I realized that it would have made my lives of my soldiers much better had they not actually had to been shot at and mortared and IED'd. The things that we experienced while we were over there. But I also realized that this was the big idea, at least in mobility, that I saw. And so I called up Google and I said, hey, Google, I'd like to work on self-driving cars. And they said, you're a freshman legislator in Florida. We're in California. No. And so I called them back 3 weeks later and said, look, I'm really interested in this topic. I'm going to work on writing some legislation on this. I'm sorry if I screw it up. And I hung up the phone. 3 weeks later, or a couple days later, I got a call back, and they said, we'll give you access to our legal team. We'll send the cars out and access to our engineers. And from there, we began a journey that really lasted 10 years and 4 iterations of a piece of legislation. Because what you come to find out in states and countries is no politician, as you saw earlier, and no bureaucrat kind of wants to be responsible for declaring a vehicle safe. And so in that world where no bureaucrat or no politician wants to be responsible, especially as fast as this technology is iterating today, wants to be responsible for declaring them safe, how do we kind of create that proxy for safety? And so the secret sauce of what Florida's done and what many other states are now doing is using insurance as a proxy for regulation. So insurance as a regulator model. And the beauty of that is, who has skin in the game? Well, it isn't the bureaucrat who has skin in the game. They've been there 20 years and they'll be there another 5 or 10. It isn't the politician because they'll be out in a couple of years. But the insurance company has skin in the game because their money is backing up that product. And so the insurance as a regulator model is really how Florida has grown and allowed the automated vehicle industry to expand in Florida. Why Voyage was in Florida, Argo was in Florida, Starsky was in Florida. And when we see the growth of technology over time coming because companies are going to move to low regulatory states. And simply the simplicity of insurance as a regulator model is what I would encourage everybody to look at because I think it works and it provides the safety and security that you need in order to deploy these vehicles quickly.
Shai, everywhere I go, or almost everywhere, people say, oh, what are you doing? I say, what were you doing? I say I was at Argo. And then they assume that because one large company shut down in sector, that the technology itself is impossible. It cannot work technically, and no business model can function. What do you say to people when you go anywhere, they don't know what you do, and then you just say, I work on self-driving?
So first, I think that by now there is evidence that self-driving is possible. We see self-driving cars in the streets of San Francisco and Austin. So I think that we are beyond this obstacle. The problems are different, and we actually wrote a paper back in 2017 about what are the main obstacles toward building an industry around autonomous vehicles and not just demoing the product, but a real industry. And we isolated 2 issues that may lead to what we called an AV winter. So the 2 issues, one of them is the problem of scalability and economic viability of the product. At the end of the day, if we want it to really work, we want it to be a good business. The second issue is safety. After all, we are putting a very heavy box on the road. It can hurt someone, and we want to really define what do we mean by safety. So these are the 2 obstacles that we isolated back in 2017. And if we look 6 years later, we see that there was a huge progress in the industry. We see on one hand companies like Waymo and Cruise that operating self-driving cars in the streets of San Francisco and Austin, but they suffer from the scalability and economic viability of the solution. They are having problem on this front. On the other hand, we have companies like Tesla that solve the scalability issue and having cars everywhere around the world, but having some issues with the safety element of the product. So this safety on the one hand and scalability on the other hand that we predicted 6 years ago, they are indeed today the main obstacle in the way to make autonomous vehicles a real product. So I can elaborate on what Mobileye is doing different.
We'll get to that. And as a Tesla driver myself, I can say you're being very diplomatic about their system, but that's another panel. Jeff, you left your political role recently, but you were still in it when the market collapsed for financing for startups in the sector. And I imagine you had to have gotten a lot of people asking you if your bill was successful and what the future of autonomous vehicles were in Florida. What did you say to those people?
So I think it's not a question of is it possible? I think the question is, where is it going to be profitable first? And I think the answer is in three parts, right? First, I think you're going to see it at port operations. All your major ports today could largely be automated. The main thing pushing back against that, at least in the US, is unions and stevedores who want to keep those jobs. But largely, that sector could be automated today. And the second place is agriculture. Most of your agricultural facilities will be automated by the end of the decade. John Deere has made huge investments in that. Every other major agricultural firm is moving towards automation. And so I think that's the second place you're going to see automation be profitable. And the third is long-haul trucking. And you're seeing this because most of the people from the Google team that left the Google team after it initially started went in to move into trucking, because they saw that as the profitable sector. In fact, your competitor company, Argo, moved into, Aurora moved into trucking pretty heavily. And so, we've got Kodiak, you've got Too Simple, you've got obviously Waymo's moving into trucking, Tesla will be in trucking. But I think the trucking space...
Tesla will be in trucking?
Eventually. But eventually that space will be, heavily driven by long haul by automated systems because of the truck driver shortage in the U.S. and other places. But I think that's where it's not a question of if, it's a question of where goes profitable first.
Shai, when I was living in Miami, as you can see from my outfit, I often talked to city officials, and invariably they wanted to know about safety. Is it safe? And as soon as I started explaining what a safety case was, or getting into any technical details, their eyes glazed over as if I had to be lying to them because I was obscuring the truth. Explain what RSS is, because that was the original paper we talked about. AV Winter was, in fact, the initial publication of Mobileye's RSS concept. Can you explain what that is and why you think that's relevant to crossing the hurdle of what safety should mean to the public and why anyone should trust AVs in general?
So RSS stands for Responsibility Sensitive Safety. And at the heart, it needs to tackle an ethical question. The ethical question is not the so-called famous trolley problem. This is not the most interesting ethical question. Instead, the ethical question is a balance between usefulness and safety of our road systems. And this is not something that is special about autonomous vehicles. We are facing this trade-off between usefulness of the road system and its safety all over. So for example, when the regulation put a traffic sign saying what is the max speed limit at some residential road, getting this number higher means road system is more efficient, but mean that more people will get hurt. On the other hand, getting it lower, meaning safer, but less useful. So all around driving, we are facing this balance. And if you want absolute safety, stay in the garage. There is no way to guarantee absolute safety. So the question is, if we cannot guarantee absolute safety, what can we guarantee, and how we can have a language that enable us to talk about exactly what is safe and what is not safe. And basically, RSS tells you that let's separate the problem, like in robotic methodology, into three components of the system: sense, plan, act. Sense is understanding the surroundings. This is another different. RSS doesn't talk about sensing, about the perception. Plan is the real tricky part in which we need to predict things about the future, okay? And predicting is a difficult business, especially when we are talking about the future. So what do I mean by that? I mean that when we are negotiating our right-of-way with other road users, we need to make prediction, and we need to understand whether we are going to yield to someone else or whether we are going to take the right of way. Likewise, when we are just following another car, we need to make prediction of what might happen to the front car. Maybe the guy in the front car will suddenly slam the brake. Can we respond in time and achieve avoiding an accident? So the idea of RSS is that we want a layer which will be very, very transparent and can be regulated, a mathematical language that tells you, okay, these are the reasonable assumptions on what you are willing to assume on other road users. You want to assume something about them, otherwise stay in the garage. So you want to assume a minimal rationality of their behavior. And once you place these assumptions, then the beauty of the model is that you can guarantee mathematically that you are never going to cause an accident. So if the assumptions hold, there is never going to be an accident. So it's not a statistical thing. We don't want to rely on statistics in decision making, in not doing something very, very stupid. What we want is transparency, and we want to say clearly what you assume about other road agents. And under these assumptions, you can make guarantees on your own behavior. So this is what stands behind responsibility-sensitive safety. And the last nice property of RSS, maybe in this short discussion, is that what we call the utopic guarantee. So what we show in the paper is that if everybody will act according to RSS, then there will be no accidents at all. So there is an utopic future.
I buy that. I understand that argument. I get it. Jeff, go back 6 years. You got voters who want to know why you passed this bill and why it's okay to have AVs testing and cruising on public roads. Imagine Shai walks into your office. You're like, Shai, you seem like a nice guy. Explain to me safety. And he gives you the explanation you just gave.
Yeah, my voters are going to care about, do you have insurance and what happens if something goes wrong?
So, all right, off script, I know I'm going to get killed for this. What is the biggest threat to AV deployment? Because I don't believe it's the technology. What is it? Is it not understanding an RSS argument? Is it not being able to convince voters that insurance is going to be cool? What is it?
Well, I think the biggest threat is finding profitable business models, because I think safety should be assumed. Like, I mean, you're not going to deploy unless the vehicles are safe, period, right? And so then the question is, what are the profitable business models that we can operate, and which ones come in first? And that's where we go back to the agriculture, the trucking, and the port operations. That's where I think this thing gets deployed, and I think your technology and others are going to help us get us there.
Actually, I'm going to say something, Shai. I was in a meeting. I don't think this is under non-disclosure anymore because Argo's finished. I was in a meeting with the strategy team back in the early days of Argo when I first joined, and I came out of media, and they said, come on in, we have a question for you. I'm like, what is it? It's like, what do you think of Mobileye and their technology? I said, the technology almost doesn't matter because they can outweight everyone. Therefore, you should be focusing on that. And that, I think, is one of the biggest threats, not to Mobileye, but to the companies that have not figured out how to cross the line of revenue to profitability before financing runs out. We're going to be running out of time soon, so let's jump to the juicy topic. It seems, I think, the biggest risk in the sector, and I've seen this in person, traveling, is every time Elon Musk opens his mouth and says, 3 months, maybe 6 months, definitely, every other company that doesn't make that promise lives under the shadow of that commitment. And this has been going on for 7 or 8 years. Mobileye is one of the biggest players. What have you done to counter the nonsense that many of my fellow Tesla owners throw up on Twitter about why the rest of the sector is allegedly behind Tesla? How do you answer that?
First, we view AVs as a marathon and not a short sprint. So we are trying to be very honest about what the technology is capable of and what the technology is not capable of. If it's not full self-driving, we will not call it full self-driving, and I'm not meaning anything.
Don't stop there, Shai. Please tell us more.
So when we build our system, we believe that the right way to win a marathon is to start with the foundations and then make incremental changes, incremental improvements, while having a solid business all the time, rather than trying to make promises or to go all the way to something that you cannot hold your breath for long enough. This is the approach, and this was Mobileye's approach from day one. So we have a solid ADAS business. We are profitable all the time. We're developing autonomous vehicles, and we are profitable all the time. Then we make the next step to supervision. Supervision is capable of driving everywhere, but it is not full self-driving because it requires a driver to have eyes on the road. So there is a driving monitoring system that makes sure that driver eyes are on the road. The next step is, after you have such a project in millions of cars driving around, you can validate it and you can know that you can go to the next level. Maybe you need more redundancy. Maybe we're not fanatic about no LiDARs, yes LiDARs. We do what needed in order to solve the problem. So if we need a front LiDAR in order to give eyes-off capabilities on highways, which is maybe something that is most useful to customers and it will be a great product, then we will do it. This is the next step. And then we will add more LiDAR maybe to the surround, while making sure that supervision is on the background all the time, so we can make sure that we tell customers exactly what they are getting, until at the end you get to a position where you can give full autonomy on consumer cars on scale of millions of cars. So this is the approach. No hype, just be honest about what you're giving and do useful products that people can enjoy today, have a solid business, and make progress.
Jeff, the first and I think second most spectacular crashes with Teslas that occurred in Florida when you were a state senator. What did people ask you about them, and what did you say?
They didn't, for the most part.
Really?
Virtually nobody. No. I mean, I think the challenge is Elon sets the bar, but and nobody really understands
the bar for hype.
Well, no, the bar for people believe, the general public believes what he's saying, and nobody else in the general public really knows most of these companies. So even if they did say something, it really doesn't matter because Elon said it, and that's what they trust and believe, or they don't trust if they've been following him for a while and understand how it is. But I think, look, I think about this question in a different way. I think 2010 to 2020 was the decade of the shared economy, right? Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, all those things come on the line. 2020 to 2030 will be the decade of electrification, where you'll see a vast majority of the fleet shift to an electric fleet. And 2030 and beyond will be the decade of automation. And that's where we should expect that timeline to play out. And we're going to see it take place in some of these other areas. But for the most part, we should just expect that timeline to play out like that. I think if you'd gone back to 2016 and 2017, everybody was talking like it was one line of code away. Well, it isn't. It's going to take longer. It's a hard problem. But we weren't expecting electrification to leapfrog like it has. But I think that's the next decade of change, and then autonomy will be after that. But I think ultimately you're going to have companies like Mobileye and others that are roughly going to get to the 4-minute mile at the same time.
Shai, I know you ride motorcycles. I have a Morgan three-wheeler. I don't recommend it. But I also have an old Porsche. I love driving it. It was my father's car. I'm very sentimental. Let's assume for a moment that Mobileye executes perfectly. Perfectly. What is the future of human-driven vehicles in a world where there are autonomous vehicles that are demonstrably safer? Will human driving survive? Should we protect it?
Well, I don't know about protecting human drivers, but what I want to touch upon is if you are driving a Porsche, you probably like the look and feel of Porsche. So the question is, if all cars are autonomous, what will be the difference between a Porsche and another car brand? If it's the same system, say even the same supervision system, so what differentiates between cars? And I think that at least this is what we're doing at Mobileye. We are treating our system not as a system, but as a platform. So the supervision system, for example, is tunable. we give the customers plenty of parameters so that the customer can tune the parameter to have the look and feel and the HMI of what customers of Porsche expect from their vehicle and other OEMs expect from their vehicle. So I think that OEMs and different car companies are here to stay, and I would guess that it will also take time until all cars will be autonomous, and even then maybe you want to still have a steering wheel and want to let people the possibility to drive by themselves, to drive manually, while the system monitors them. Because you can think about 2 is greater than 1, right? So either only the human driver is driving, but then came ADAS system that protects the human driver. Then you have the autonomous car is driving, and then you have the DMS system that makes sure that the human is protecting the system. And if the system is capable enough, then you can switch between the two and say, okay, I have both a human and an autonomous system, and this is even better. So maybe it is to stay, but it's very hard to predict how it looks like, how it will look like in 10 years or so.
If only someone had created an organization called the Human Driving Association to guarantee that we have the right to drive in the future. Jeff, closing remarks?
Look, I think your technology and the technologies other companies are going to drive us to the future. And I think to your point, I think the question of whether all the OEMs survive. Listen, I took to get here today. I did not care the brand of car that picked me up. I was just glad one showed up within 30 minutes to get me here. And I think that's where, if we're moving to a fully automated future, I think that's how we need to think about this. Do some of these brands go away? Yeah, absolutely they do, because nobody will really care about the vehicle that's picking them up. Now, if I ordered an Uber Black, I think I want a black car to show up, or one of a higher caliber to show up than an Uber X. But I think for the most part, people aren't going to care what brand that Uber X is. So I think it's an interesting question to wonder if we're moving into generic car that has this technology in it, and I think the answer is maybe. Listen, the best infotainment system ever devised is the iPhone or the smartphone, and how that integrates into vehicles. It will be very interesting to see, but ultimately it's about the infotainment system when I'm in this generic vehicle that entertains me and that keeps me going, because I'll trust that the automated system created by Mobileye and others will be safe enough to get me to my final destination.
Shai, closing remark?
So I think we need to look at the bigger picture for a moment. We are in the middle of a revolution, the AI revolution. And if I look at this field, in the last 4 years, there has been 4 AI revolutions around unsupervised learning, generative AI, things like ChatGPT, the ability of AI to make logical reasoning, simulation to real, so the ability to take AI outside of the cyber and take it to the real world, and autonomous vehicles are a great example of it. And I think that if we look at this bigger picture, we understand that it's very, very hard to predict exactly what will be the pace that things will evolve in the future, also in the autonomous vehicle space. Things that look to us like science fiction, complete science fiction, just 4 years ago, are now possible at the laptop of every person. So I think the future is going to be very, very interesting, and I think it's AVs are part of the future and are here to stay, and we will all enjoy them in the future. Thank you.